of British Jews, I would like to thank the Home Secretary for taking the time to join us in our latest podcast series.
Hold on, Marie, hold on.
Welcome to all those who are joining us this evening from across the UK and beyond. On behalf of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, I would like to thank the Home Secretary for joining us for the latest of our podcast series. Our podcasts are online events which address the key issues facing the Jewish community. As I am sure most of you are aware, the Right Honourable Priti Patel, MP for Witham, has served as Home Secretary since July 19, when she was appointed to the post by Prime Minister Boris Johnson. As one of the great offices of state, the Home Secretary has responsibility for areas of policy, including law enforcement, security, and issues relating to immigration. These are issues which the Jewish community takes particularly seriously and which we look forward to exploring this evening. Unfortunately, Jewish communities worldwide, including our own, have been the target of those who wish to do us serious harm. Although it may feel like longer, it was less than a year ago that a neo-Nazi gunman in Halle, Germany, attempted to break into a local synagogue on Yom Kippur. After being foiled by a security door, he then turned his gun on passers-by before attacking people in a nearby kebab shop. He killed 2 and injured 2 others. We are grateful, Home Secretary, for all that you and the government have been doing to keep us safe, including the crucial grant to the Community Security Trust. We know that you personally take these issues very seriously, and we have been grateful for your checking in with the Board of Deputies and other communal organisations when Jewish communities have come under threat. While not immediately as deadly, we know that online is the new front line in the battle against hate, and that many extremists are being radicalised by what they see on social media. With your department taking a joint lead on the online harms bill, there is an unparalleled opportunity for our country to clamp down on racism on the internet. In our previous conversations, you have taken an admirably strong stand on this, and many in the community will have appreciated your support over the Wiley incident. It would be good to hear the latest on this tonight. Immigration and asylum are topics that are extremely close to the heart of British Jews. Many in our community came to the UK as frightened and vulnerable refugees, fleeing vicious persecution. The UK is rightly proud of facilitating the kinder transport, where Jewish children were welcomed into this country and saved from the Holocaust. Many in our community were concerned when the government closed the Dubs scheme, put forward by himself, Lord Dubs, a beneficiary of the kinder transport, before a sufficiently large number of refugee children could be resettled. We look forward to hearing how the government can continue its proud tradition of giving shelter to those fleeing the worst situations and otherwise supporting vulnerable and minority communities in this country. Once again, I want to thank the Home Secretary for her friendship over many of the key issues facing our community and for giving us this time tonight. I'm now going to hand over to Gillian Merron, Chief Executive. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie, and welcome, Home Secretary. And we have a bit of an idea of how busy it is in government at the moment, so we're very pleased that you're joining us this evening. So I add my thanks to that of our President, Marie van der Zyl. So just to run through perhaps some of the key issues that we want to talk to you before I turn to questions from our audience. Let's start with COVID-19, as you'd expect me to. And you also know very well that we're heading towards Jewish New Year. So we wish you Shana Tova, a sweet, happy and healthy Jewish New Year. And this will be very different for us in many, many ways. So we'd very much welcome an update on what the government's doing and your department's doing in respect of COVID-19 to keep us safe this Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, Gillian, thank you, and Marie as well. Thank you for your, your warm introduction, and also for making tonight possible. We've not been able to get together because of COVID, which is a real shame. But for the Jewish community in particular, I don't need to restate, the sort of shared values that we have, and also our strong ways of working. And I think in particular, this time of year, in terms of the Jewish New Year and festivals in particular, where obviously people, community, families come together. Communal worship and prayer matters a great deal. I think even more than ever right now, actually, as we've all gone through a really difficult time. So if I may, I'd like to just say a few things about COVID, where we are at. As we all know, and I'm really sorry to say this, and saddened actually, we are seeing COVID increase in terms of the spread of the disease. We are seeing obviously infection rates increase right now as well. And so subsequently, it's right that we have a plan as government to control the virus. And controlling the virus has basically meant we've had to put more measures in place to restrict, I'm afraid, I feel very strongly about this, some of our own personal freedoms and liberties, the way in which we can gather together. So, we now have restricted the number of people that can gather, come together, 6 people in total. And I guess at this time, particularly the Jewish New Year, that will be difficult and challenging, obviously. I completely understand that. However, I also think it's important that, we can still celebrate festivals, holidays, but also community well-being and practices by just being very conscientious. And I know people are doing that. I know within the Jewish community, you've been doing that. You've all been doing that in terms of, protecting households, using online worship, coming together as we are tonight as well. I've seen this in my own community too, in the Hindu community. So we're not out of the woods yet. And that is a sad reality of this awful disease. We have some clear guidance, we have some clear measures, and also in terms of synagogue worship as well. There's been some good guidance that has been issued. I hope that has been helpful. It is a list of do's and don'ts, but it's more positive, I think, in terms of negative about what you can't do. Guidance in terms of communal areas, communal resources, but also broadcasting services online. Absolutely still encouraging and coming together. And I think that matters. I think it really matters a great deal. For the Jewish community, but more generally for also our health and well-being. I think that is just so important right now.
You're quite right, Home Secretary. It is very challenging for us as a faith community, and let's hope we won't be in this same position next year.
Yeah.
Let's move now to something that's affecting us all: online hate. You yourself have been sadly at the receiving end of vicious, racist online attacks, so you know exactly how that feels. Marie mentioned rightly that we very much welcomed your intervention and action in respect of the rapper Wiley's disgusting anti-Semitic comments. However, the fact is online hate is of particular importance now, regrettably. We've seen the number of anti-Semitic attacks online rise very sharply over the last few years. And very regrettably, we've seen a very inadequate response from the social media companies. And it's that I want to focus on, because we're looking, of course, now to the government's online harms bill, which is on its way. From the Board of Deputies' point of view, we want to see 3 things in that bill, amongst others. So and I'd welcome your comments on this. First of all, definition. What is anti-Semitism? We come up against this time and time again. The social media companies quibble over what it is. So clarification on, and definition, including adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, would greatly assist. In addition to definitions, enforcement. For example, seeing the number of monitoring staff in the UK from the companies relative to the number of UK users. In other words, that they are adequately and appropriately resourced, so that there is an understanding of the UK context. And thirdly, of course, accountability. If they're not going to come willingly, we're going to have to see them dragged kicking and screaming, it appears. So accountability has to include substantial fines and executive responsibility to compel the companies to do what is, to the rest of us, obviously, the right thing. So your response on those, and anything else, Home Secretary, and how you and the government will be keeping our communities safe online.
So I think my views are, I think, within the community quite well known. About what I find is just not just a challenging area. Of course it's challenging, but actually quite a repulsive area. I don't look at the online space as just from an online harm perspective. I see online offending taking place, and there's a difference between the two. You know, we've become accustomed to, and I don't like saying this, to internet trolls, you know, harassment, and just what I just think I would consider to be quite inadequate, grossly menacing behaviour, to what I now see as offending, online offending, which involves targeted, malicious hate, messages, language, the whole lot, anti-Semitism. And I, you know, did not hesitate in terms of the Wiley incident, but let me just put this into context. That took time to achieve some results and outcomes. And I think, Gillian, if I may say so, I think that's effectively, you know, when it comes to the three areas that you have just highlighted, why these areas are important. And I'll come on to some of the specifics in a minute, but actually two of the three, well, they all matter, but two of the three speak to the whole issue about inadequacy in terms of response rates, and actions and responses from the actual firms involved. And then, of course, there's this whole issue of accountability and responsibility. And that, to me, has become such a, perhaps it's fair to say, quite an opaque area, particularly with these firms. You know, there is not enough that they are doing. They'll pay a bit of lip service. I've seen that, you know, we're on the receiving end. Anyone that's on the receiving end of this sort of vile abuse and online offending understands that, you know, we're kind of like fobbed off and you receive a lot of lip service. Well, I think that is wholly inadequate. So in terms of the government response, as you all know, this is being led by the Department for Communities, and we are obviously working with them specifically on this. And for the government, it is clear that online offending is as serious as offline offending, and that is the reason why we've had the white paper and why there is a development right now for robust legislation. We have legislation, obviously, to deal with some aspects of online internet trolls, cyber stalking, for example, but we are planning to legislate on online harms. And Gillian, to your point about resourcing and adequacy and accountability, also establishing an independent regulator as set out in the Online Harms White Paper. Now, with that, of course, the independent regulator must have the skills. They must be tooled up, I think is the best phrase to use, tooled up in terms of understanding the tools that are used to perpetrate criminality, offending, online harms. So they need to have full understanding and be cognizant of the area in which they are working in, the way in which technology is involving, the use of end-to-end encryption, for example, and how that can perpetrate a load of harms. So, we had the original consultation. The work is taking place right now, actually, with DCMS and the Home Office, predominantly DCMS, in terms of pulling together draft legislation. We've also been in touch with, we're working, and we have asked the Law Commission to review the current laws on offensive online communications and hate crime, to importantly highlight the gaps in criminal law which cause the problems in tackling the abuse. I think, Gillian and Maria, I know some of the conversations we've had before, but we've looked at real examples where they're not getting in front of the courts, where, action is not being undertaken. We have to understand where the gaps are effectively in the system around this whole area. So there is a great deal of work taking place there. We're also doing much more work, I should just add, with the Police Online Hate Crime Hub. And that is also important in terms of the police and the police response to victims of these awful, abhorrent crimes, and importantly, assuring that they are effectively investigated and also that they are supervised in terms of the type of support that is required. And then, of course, the big elephant in the room, so to speak, is the tech companies. The type of work that is needed there in terms of actually getting the engagement that is required, but getting them to account for their actions and take responsibility, which fundamentally is what this is all about. So we've got a lot of work taking place. I would argue there's a lot more to do. I take I think it's fair to say, a robust stance with the tech firms, with the companies at every single level. And I will continue to do that. I'm quite unapologetic about this, actually, because of the type of harms that are being perpetrated, the level of offending that's taking place, but also, quite frankly, it's the accountabilities. These firms must be accountable. They are the hosts. They are hosting some of the most abhorrent abuse, unacceptable abuse, anti-Semitic abuse, which, if I may just conclude, Gillian, is why your comment about the definition of anti-Semitism matters a great deal, because it has to be embedded in understanding for the various authorities and organisations to then take the right steps and the right action. And then, of course, that's highly relevant in terms of prosecuting, actually taking actions and prosecuting some of the cases, because there are cases out there, and quite frankly, we're nowhere near to getting results and prosecutions and actually taking them forward. So there is so much more work that's required here.
Well, the robust response is really going to be the only response. As you know, we've been very robust, and despite all of that, it's been slow in terms of getting a response. So we're looking forward to progress through the Online Harms Bill, and we'll continue, obviously, to press the points that I've raised. So we look forward to seeing the progress that you've outlined. Let's move on to talk about Windrush, Home Secretary. Our community, you will know, to be largely descended from immigrants and refugees, and includes immigrants and refugees. And we as a community were horrified to see how those of the Windrush generation were treated. It is right and proper that the government has apologised for this treatment. And I know that you have spoken of an action plan for, and I quote, a genuine cultural shift at the Home Office. So we'd like to know, how's it going, and what assurances have you got for us that such a thing can't happen again?
Yeah, I have quite a lot to say about Windrush, because it is an appalling legacy issue that I've inherited in my department. And Gillian, I concur with your comments. We're all from immigrant backgrounds. We all have had different journeys to where we are today. And our experiences, have helped to shape us, define us, and all the rest of it, and our upbringing. Windrush, I have described it very clearly as effectively, a dark period of stain, actually. And the Wendy Williams report, the Windrush Lessons Learned report, is utterly shocking reading. I felt completely I think, drained and numb when I read it, when I received it, I think back in March. And there's no two ways about this. I mean, Wendy Williams highlighted what can only be described as institutional thoughtlessness over several decades, actually, just a generational thing, actually, within governments. And it applied to a range of governments, not just Conservative governments, but, you know, previous Labour governments as well, in terms of the ways of working and the culture and attitude. Can't emphasise that enough, the culture and attitude from officials, from government, their stance and their posture to this particular generation, the Windrush generation. And it is shocking, primarily because we know the Windrush generation were the generation post-war that came to the UK to build their lives, but actually to do something else, to rebuild our country. So there are a vast number of recommendations in Wendy's report. I've already spoken, I think now 2 to 3 times in the House of Commons about this, at my request actually, with statements and updates. We will be formalising, we are formalising the recommendations now, because there are many recommendations, and they're deeply complicated recommendations, some of which go across government departments, not just the Home Office as well. But the good news is that many of those recommendations, they touch on, yes, fairness, which is an important value, I think, that we, and principle we all hold dear, but also literally the type of support that should be given to people of different backgrounds. And by that, I also mean the way in which we treat people of different backgrounds in government, across government departments, but also in the Home Office. So my department basically put a load of process in place that effectively depersonalised the way in which people were treated who were Windrush cases. They failed to see the people behind the cases. They failed to see the actual individuals, and they put process in the way. So there is a great deal of work. There's internal work taking place on training, staff, cultural changes as well. I mean, ways of working, attitudes, that's fundamental, really, in terms of shifting behaviours. But also, Gillian, we have a whole host per recommendation of actions that we are undertaking, and we will be publishing pretty soon now. I would definitely say, if not by the end of this month, at the beginning of October. So that is how quickly we have moved. And Wendy Williams herself basically said that we must take time, give time and consideration to her recommendations. And she did not want to see us sort of, you know, here it is 3 months afterwards, you know, let's tick a load of boxes and say it's done and dusted. It is not. There are a lot of cultural aspects that the whole of government will be learning from this, and rightly so.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on, because it's a natural stopping off point to talk about refugees. Home Secretary, we've both, myself and Marie, have referred to the nature of our community as being intrinsically linked with refugees because of our own history. Yeah. And also, as Marie said, we have asked the government to back previously asked the government to back the Dubs Amendment to allow the UK to take in child refugees from countries facing tragic circumstances to protect the lives and well-being of those children. And I believe you also know how uncomfortable many are with the language that has been used with regard to desperate people who make desperate journeys across the Channel, for example. And of course, it is right to crack down on people smugglers. There is no question, and that must be done. But where there is deep dissatisfaction and anger is where some of the language used about their vulnerable victims has been unacceptable. So I'd like to hear from you about your response to that, what can be done to address the type of unacceptable language that is used, and also whether the government will reconsider bringing in legislation and provision to make the kind of provision that the Dubs Amendment sought to do.
Well, Gillian, thank you. I think first of all, let me just start by saying it is a fact. Our country, the UK, has an incredible history, actually, a proud history of granting protection to those who need it. And that, of course, is in line with our international obligations. And, you know, that's the 51 Convention, but also the humanitarian obligations that we have. You know, I can say this as a former Secretary of State for International Development. You know, I've gone around the world. I've been there in refugee camps. I've seen the billions that we spend on humanitarian support. And it's right that we do that in terms of granting security and protection to those that need it. The world is an incredibly unstable place. And I think it's fair to say, certainly since 2015, we've seen the largest movement of people, mass migration, because of conflict, particularly in the Middle East and in Syria. Now, in terms of resettlement, and I do just want to talk about resettlement before I come on to some of the language and issues around illegal migration and small boats, because you have touched on that. The government has always stood up and been true to its commitment on resettling 20,000 refugees affected by the Syrian conflict. And that is a well-developed scheme, an absolutely brilliantly developed scheme, which at the time was controversial. I think we all remember that. And we had a job of work actually through the UK resettlement scheme, trying to find partners on resettlement, local authorities, trying to get this going. But in all credit to the government, from 2015 onwards, that scheme has been successful. And to date, it has resettled over 19,000 refugees. And I think that is something that we should be proud of. And our figures on resettlement are one of the highest in the EU. And I think actually, I do know overall resettlement to the EU has gone up and up and up, because obviously the EU itself has become more of a, you know, transit point for people coming up through the Sahel, through Libya, through the Mediterranean, and effectively coming to the EU, but also transiting to the UK through, sadly, illegal routes, and sadly through the hands of people traffickers. Now, there are a couple of points that I do want to make here. People trafficking, and we see this with illegal migration, has become a lucrative business model for criminals and crooks. These are not good people at all. And I can sit here as Home Secretary, as somebody that sees, you know, a lot of the evidential base, the intelligence around organised criminal gangs. They're not just in the UK, they're not just sort of sitting in Calais, they're also in other EU member states, and they're upstream. And they are responsible for absolutely facilitating people and putting them through some pretty degrading treatment as well, which is why we are concentrating, working with our National Crime Agency and our law enforcement. We are targeting our resources going after the criminals. And I'm quite unapologetic about that, because we should be taking away their livelihoods, and we should be stopping this dreadful, dreadful trade of people trafficking. But also, we do know that there are genuine refugees who are fleeing, and they, you know, they need protection. They're looking for a safe country. But one of the things that we have seen, certainly in my time as Home Secretary, and this is through small boats, so clandestine arrivals through small boats, that not only are these crossings unacceptable, and they're being facilitated by criminal organised gangs and individuals, but also we're finding that individuals have come to us via other EU countries, and many of them have also sought to claim asylum in other countries, EU countries. And because they are travelling through safe countries, and if you remember rightly, back in 2015, when we were setting up our resettlement schemes, and we were signing, you know, big packages around Syria, mass migration, refugee camps, humanitarian aid, humanitarian protection, we all signed up, particularly EU countries, to ensuring that where people went to the first safe country, they would claim asylum and seek refuge there. I'm afraid that system has broken down. And therefore, you know, many of our counterparts are not supporting that. And actually that is helping to facilitate people trafficking and smuggling across continents. And that is deeply unhelpful. We need to stop that, we really do. But Gillian, you've asked about what are we going to do more long term. We are going to bring in changes. these will effectively become legislative changes, because you can't make minor changes to a system or to policies. So when we're in the stage, obviously, you would have seen we are pretty chock-a-block right now in Parliament. Work is afoot right now around the creation of resettlement schemes, legal routes. And I say that because we have also just recently created new legal routes through the points-based immigration system, which effectively goes live next month. And will be ready for the big sort of open to the rest of the world on the 1st of January. Now that covers legal routes. That covers people that have skills that can come to our country, that can be employed by employers, sponsored by employers. We also have a duty through our own international obligations to make sure that we have the right kind of resettlement routes, so that people who are subject to persecution, vulnerability, instability in their own region and in their own country do not have to put their lives in the hands of smugglers and traffickers, and that we can therefore create the safe routes for them, the right routes, to ensure that they are getting resettled, they become refugees in the right kind of way. Because currently our asylum system is absolutely now, as we've seen, it's literally become subject to asylum shopping for people that want to come to the UK, but they will literally go to other EU member states to get here first, even though we are actually also doing a lot of work with other EU member states to return people to their first safe country where they could have claimed asylum, because it's unsustainable for the United Kingdom just to be the backstop for endless asylum claims. Our asylum system right now houses over 56,000 people, and that is growing by the day through small boats. So we need to have a new approach, an approach that absolutely prioritises those that are vulnerable and can come through here, and quite frankly should come to our country and be given refuge through resettlement routes. And that is something that we are looking at.
In view of time, Home Secretary, I just want to bring you back to the point about language, because I know people want to know about that. And I also want to bring in a question that I've got on this issue from Amos Schonfield, who says, safe and legal, because it ties in very much what you've been saying, safe and legal routes for refugee settlement have been closed since March. When will they be reopened? So I wonder if you could give us a word on that, and also on the issue of language.
Well, first of all, on resettlement routes, we will look to make longer term changes. So this isn't a case of just reopening routes that were closed because of COVID. We have to have routes that are, effectively going to be sustainable and viable for us. We have a crisis right now, quite frankly, when it comes to accommodating and housing asylum seekers. Actually, COVID in its own right has shone quite a spotlight basically on this whole area. And this is the same across government. We're seeing this with people that are homeless, trying to find them government accommodation. This has been an absolute challenge for us. So we're not able just to literally switch back to previous routes. We want to create the right kind of resettlement routes. And as I've said, that is something that we will do, but we also have to do this within the context of our wider immigration and asylum system. That is the right thing to do. And we also need to make some legislative changes. And the reason why we need to make legislative changes is because on asylum, many of our asylum policies date back to 1999, and that's when legislation was conceived and then built upon. We think we now need to make some changes to actually create the right kind of routes, put them on this right kind of statutory footing in relation to our wider immigration and asylum system. And then the point of language is important. And I've got to say this, I see this every day, when I finish this call, and not just in addition to the Home Office work that I do, I am a member of Parliament. People write to me every single day about illegal migration. And I have to say the language that I see is not measured. It is not proportionate. I would say it's deeply, deeply hostile and emotive. And therefore, again, if we as a government have the right kind of routes, the right kind of policies that speak to our values and to our international commitments, then I think we can also bring the British public with us in terms of our ability to actually engage the British public in a much wider way, in a much more positive way, about the role that we have to play internationally, to show leadership to the world when it comes to giving refuge, giving asylum, and creating legal routes.
I thank you, Home Secretary, and I know that many in our community want to see improvements in this area, both in terms of practical handling and also in terms of language and approach, as I know you have heard tonight and have heard before. So I would like to turn to the question of Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities, because that's an area that I've been asked to also put to you. And again, the community takes an interest, not least because of our shared experience during World War II of persecution. And you will know that the Board of Deputies made a submission to a recent Home Office consultation expressing anxiety about Home Office proposals on unauthorised encampments, because the root of it, we believe that there's a problem of authorised sites, the lack of authorised sites, and that's where the problem originates from. So if you could fairly concisely, so I can come to more questions from our audience, tell us what the government will do to support this marginalised community.
Yeah, so there are a number of things that are going on, and obviously I know about the consultation when that took place. But Gillian, you've spoken about the need for sites. Now, of course, that sits within planning policy and planning regulations, and it also sits within the local development frameworks of local authorities. And I know that you'll all be aware of some of the contentious issues around planning policy for sites. And actually the work that we will do with MHCLG very much speaks to this as well, because it's right that sites are allocated, but also it's right that local authorities, make sure that they feature in their plan. Now, part of the challenge we have, and this is not necessarily down to the Home Office, the Home Office's work in this particular area actually refers to some of the criminality that takes place. And that has happened through traveller communities and unauthorised encampments. Now, that's very different to Gypsy and Roma communities. The two are absolutely separate, where we have seen criminality, violence taking place. We saw one particular traveller criminal, I don't go into the details of this, but basically we saw a police officer that was effectively murdered through a robbery that took place by a traveller family. So, there are things that do need to be done and looked at, and obviously from a Home Office perspective, we are absolutely doing that. But I would also emphasise the need with local communities, not just with local communities, but local government, local councils, to ensure that they are absolutely doing everything in terms of their site allocations for accommodation, to have sites for these communities, so that, and they don't have to be permanent sites, as we know, they need to be sites that are accessible and sites that are viable. And that is a basic requirement, I think, when it comes to the accommodation that, is required for this particular traveller community.
It would be good to have your response. This question's come in. Any comment on the historic agreement signed today between Israel, the UAE, Israel and Bahrain?
Well, it's welcome, and I think it's long overdue. That is something that I think we should absolutely look at being supportive to. I think, when we look at the work that has taken place, when we look at the tensions, between communities in that part of the world, I think we should absolutely, and I know, funny enough, I know the Foreign Secretary has spoken about this recently as well. We should also, notwithstanding the fact that we have close cooperation with GCC countries, Bahrain and the UAE, but also with Israel. So it's important that, we make sure that we do our bit where we can as well to ensure these agreements absolutely succeed.
Yeah, it's an important day, I feel, when we see that kind of cooperation. I hope that we will see more, and we'd welcome any support from the UK government to encourage that. Home Secretary, just a question that's come in before I just finish on the question of our CST volunteers, who I know will want to hear from you. I've got a question here from Raymond Solomon, who says, and I quote, "Do you recognise that it was inappropriate to use inflammatory language such as activist lawyers when referring to people doing their job in upholding this country's laws?"
Well, I think first of all, what I'd say to that is that it is a fact that when it comes to removing people, and I don't mean removing anybody, I mean removing people such as foreign national offenders, violent criminals, people that have done great harm to victims in this country and absolutely abuse the hospitality of our country. I think it's wrong that actually we do have lawyers that, you know, spend their time trying to frustrate their deportation. I just think that is completely wrong. I really do. And I appreciate that lawyers may be doing their jobs, but at the same time, they are actively campaigning to frustrate the deportation of many of these individuals. And many of these individuals, I should say, you know, do have criminal backgrounds. They have caused great harm. They have hurt victims. You know, we sometimes, too often, I think, forget the victims that are involved in some of these cases and these crimes. And I think on that basis alone, you know, we should be, you know, I think as Home Secretary and from a government perspective as well, we want to do much more, and there is more work taking place already within this government about, for example, the removal of foreign national offenders and those people that have come here illegally and done harm in our country.
Secretary, let's turn to the final point. You know how many dedicated and talented Community Securities Trust volunteers we are blessed to have in our community. We appreciate, as Marie said, the funding that comes to CST to protect our community. Many of those CST volunteers will be out in force over Rosh Hashanah and the High Holy Days. A few words from you that they can take to their hearts and to their communities before I turn to our Vice President, Amanda Bowman, to give a vote of thanks to you. Home Secretary.
Thank you, Gillian. Well, first of all, you know, I really just want to express my personal thanks, best wishes and gratitude to those that are part of the community, but obviously volunteering, giving up their time to really do amazing work, tremendous work. And obviously it's not just about, you know, the funding that we give. The funding is important, but actually it solidifies that bond between us, I think, in terms of recognising challenges within the community, security issues, safety issues as well. I mean, safety is paramount for all the reasons that we've touched upon, I think, Gillian, in previous meetings, you know, if not a little bit on this call as well. And I think at this particular time, you know, as we go into the holidays, symbolic times, auspicious times in the calendar as well, I do want to share my best wishes, and I think also, especially so at this time, these have been challenging times for everyone. COVID, the inability to come together, the inability to celebrate together as well in the normal conventional way. But I say to everyone, not just all volunteers, but all members as well, you know, please stay safe, look after each other, support each other. And carry on, you know, doing what you do so fantastically. I think, you know, the work that you all do within the Jewish community, CST, you know, and across the community is just tremendous. It really is.
Thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to pass to Amanda Bowman, Vice President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, who leads our Defence Division. Amanda.
Thank you, Gillian. Home Secretary, on behalf of all of us here at the Board of Deputies, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us this evening and discuss these issues of such significant interest to our community. In a democracy, there are many points of view to put forward. That's as true of the Jewish community as it is of the general population. But it's only in a democracy that a senior member of the government would agree to come and answer questions from our community. And that's something which we do not take for granted. The Home Secretary will now be leaving us, but I would encourage all of you on social media to stay with us for just a few more minutes to find out about some of the other political events that we're planning over the next few weeks. Thank you, Home Secretary.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you, Amanda, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening and to wish you that you keep safe, keep well, and Shana Tova. We have a number of events that will be coming up over the next few days, which I will refer to. And we will also put up a holding screen and get information out and about to you. And here it is. You can now see a thanks from us for joining tonight's podcast and the events that we are doing. Monday, 21st of September. You can find all of these on our website, and we'll be promoting them through social media and all other means. So Monday, 21st of September, we have a meeting at Labour Conference. Sunday, 27th, at meet the new Lib Dem leader. And on Monday, the 5th of October, we have an event at Conservative Party Conference. So we've got it all covered here. And as I say, I wish you all a happy, sweet and safe new year. Look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.